Over the last few days, you probably look at your portfolio and panic because Trump was going on about no ceasefire with Iran. There was more major escalation moves, oil prices were flying, and major indices were closing below their technical support last Friday. And Monday all felt like it was going to be another brutal start to the week. And then in the blink of an eye, everything changed yesterday right before the market opened because of this tweet that you are seeing right here. We saw stocks shooting back up, oil collapse, and it seems like the panic vanished. But before you log into your brokerage account and start buying this rally, I want to share something with you, and it is the truth that you're going to hear today. So, today's video, we are going to look at whether this is a genuine de escalation by Trump and also a highly suspicious mega trade and what you should prepare for the week ahead. Before we actually started the session yesterday, the setup was looking ugly. Market had opened in full panic, and we saw that in the Asia markets right after the weekend ultimatum by Trump threatening strikes on Iran power plants unless the Strait of Hormuz was reopened within 48 hours. So we saw that Japan and South Korea actually opened sharply lower. Kospi, which is the Korean index, actually slumped 6%, triggering another circuit breaker. And we also saw gold dropping 3% intraday and even more throughout the day itself. So this was the kind of development that were immediately hitting all the market's weak points at once. Then suddenly there came a reversal. And this was during pre-market on Monday, where Trump announced a 5-day pause on military action against Iranian power plants right after his 48 hours ultimatum. And what did he say over here is over the last 2 days, he had very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. So he also suggests there were multiple points of consensus, including ideas around enriched uranium management and also joint control of the Strait of Hormuz. So this one single headline actually changed the entire market move for the day. We saw oil tanking down and stocks started surging in pre-market, and suddenly it seems like risk appetite is rushing back in. But here is where you need to pay very, very close attention because it is not what it looks like on the surface. Because when we look at what Iran is saying right after Trump announced this 5-day cooling down period, the Speaker of Iran Parliament actually denies talks. So this is the tweet that he shared. The Iranian people demands complete and remorseful punishment of aggressor, and no negotiations have been held with the US, and fake news is used to manipulate the financial and oil markets. Now, let's dive deeper into this because this is a serious accusation, right? And is it true or not? Because what we are seeing is that even though Trump says that he is holding out for this 5-day period to not attack Iranian power plants, when looking at flight data, we are seeing that military deployment are still moving forward towards Iran. That the Trump administration is still preparing for the possible deployment of ground forces, and we are seeing that the 82nd Airborne Division from the US is appear to be underway towards the Middle East. Now, this is important, right? Because the market did not buy a peace deal. What Trump is doing is actually he is buying time. And you will ask, why would someone manufacture a headline like this? Because this kind of time buying headline, it creates this temporary relief rally that we saw yesterday. And it tells us that someone kind of needs that pressure to come off immediately. But what was that pressure? That pressure was a 10-year yield market, basically the bond market. And this is the critical part of the entire story. So you might think that the 10-year yield is not interesting, but this is actually one of the most important part that affects all the headlines that we are seeing today. So on the day itself, we did actually see treasury yield hitting a high of 4.45%. And now it has been down to 4.3, even though it's still at elevated level. But why does a high treasury yield become a problem for the government, right? It's because a high treasury yield leads to high housing rates, okay, higher mortgage rates, and it also increases higher borrowing costs. And also with the debt in the US now being so high, it means that the interest rate on the debt is going to be higher. So basically, higher yield destroys any chance of stock sustaining an upside. And when we start to see the yield going up and also risk assets collapsing together. Now, this is where, in terms of politics, even though politics and markets are two different things, but sometimes of what we are seeing now, it gets intertwined with each other. and the political incentive to drop this kind of negotiation headline becomes very enticing. And it is exactly what we saw, because this forces the bond market to create a pause. So this 5-day pause news by Trump, as you can see, it's not a confirmed de-escalation of the war, because they desperately need to stop the stock market from crashing and interest rates from growing higher. So this headline is probably being dropped to force a pause, and some might call it market manipulation, plain and simple. And if you actually want to really dig deeper into market and manipulation, actually just before he announced this 5-day cool down period, something actually happened in the stock market. A mega trade happened. Now, this is from Kobayashi newsletter. This is on Twitter. But basically, what they found out was that this was the instant time, which was just minutes before the 5-day pause news was announced to the public. Someone actually executed $1.5 billion worth of S&P 500 futures. So it was bought. Okay, so this was at 6:50 a.m. Eastern time. And 15 minutes later, just 15 minutes later, Trump comes out and announced this peace deal is underway. And look at that rally from here. Look at that pump from here. And because S&P adds about $2 trillion, this position over here actually made $60 million from this trade. So it seems like this is being timed to perfection, right? This particular trade was perfectly positioned for the exact headlines that dropped minutes later, making an absolute fortune for this particular individual or this particular group before a chance of any retail investor even had a chance to read the news. Now, this is very suspicious, right? Because how can it be timed to such perfect levels? And this is honestly not the first time that we've seen this. Now, nobody can prove insider trading without looking at these massive investigations, but looking at timing like this, right, it tells you exactly who really controls these market swings, and it also puts into proof about what I was sharing earlier, that this was not a pure escalation, especially with what we are seeing, the troops still moving to the Middle East. On a brighter note, right, the question is, if people are thinking, will there be a deal or not? Because at the end of the day, the S&P still closed green, even though it retraced a little bit. Now, let's look back and study history to see if possibly this might tell us anything. And in fact, we have actually seen this exact playbook before, most notably the Liberation Day tariffs back in April 25. So this news that you see over here, this was on April 24, where Trump says the US is talking with China on trade after Beijing's denial. So basically what happened, right, was back in April, the 10-year yield was also soaring above 4.5%. And Trump also came out and made similar claims about China, saying that they are in talks with China. And China actually responded the same, okay, as Iran did, right? They denied Trump claims that they were involved in active negotiation. So this Iran thing that we are seeing, this Trump deal that we are seeing, actually is not new. This happened less than a year ago. He did it before. And Trump responded by saying there's absolutely no negotiations between the US and China. So right after this, what happened? Okay, because 3 weeks later, we actually had a deal between the US and China, the first trade deal, reducing tariffs to a 30% baseline. So if history tells us anything, even though we are seeing this flip-flopping by Trump, we are seeing Iran denying, it is definitely possible that there is something, probably a similar situation that is happening right now with Iran behind closed doors as well. And when we look at the price movement of the index, so this is a daily chart. As you can see, on the start of the day, we went up all the way to 662, and we did pull back to 658 on the day itself. And even though Iran came out denying the claims, we still ended the day positive. And not just the S&P, we saw the Nasdaq and the Dow ended positive as well. So why is that the case? It is not the fact that Iran denied and the market sold it down. It is the fact of the message that Trump is willing to discuss for de-escalation. So that is what the message is saying, right? It is not about the fact that Iran is denying. Of course, that effect, and it put down the closing price of yesterday. But the fact that Trump was willing of his message to de-escalate, it sends a positive signal to the stock market. And we saw the market added quite a bit of value yesterday. But of course, when we look deeper, right, as to consolidating all the news that we saw, this still definitely does not look like a healthy, clean accumulation day. So the rebound appears a little bit more to what we call panic repositioning and a little bit of short covering than with confidence long-term buying. Because when we look at how the technicals are looking at, we did close above, just above the 200 EMA. I would say that even though it's right above, it's possible that it might still be just right on this line over here, right? This is still a technical resistance, and we want to see a bit more confirmation over the next few days that we are closing above over here. Because other than that, it is very hard to say whether this is a true rebound, because the market is definitely struggling to prove that this was anything more than just a single day violent rally. Now, here is my overall take, right? What we are seeing now is a pause. It is definitely not a confirmed long-term solution. It might buy the market a few sessions of relief, but it does not remove the underlying two-way risk until we see Iran coming out and also saying that they have discussed, they are in talks with the US. But right now, we see one party willing to make a deal, which is the US side, but Iran is still not willing to do so. But on the US side, you can see they're still preparing to push ground troops to Iran, right? So don't mistake this for like a true shift in trend. This means that if you chase every headline, it will probably make a little bit less sense than staying selective and disciplined. Because in this kind of environment, the goal is to not trade against the algorithm that are following Trump's every words, right? The markets may get short-term relief, but the underlying risks have not gone away. Next, don't trade the noise, because when markets are driven by noise, it becomes a low probability game, right? It is to keep your process intact and focus on quality, and remember that volatility can create opportunity without requiring panic or prediction. And when markets gets driven by fear, positioning, and the noise coming from policies, patience usually matters more than speed. And last but not least, discipline is your real edge, right? And you are got to stay selective and let volatility work for you, not against you, because discipline and patience tend to outperform reaction and prediction over the long run. That's all I have for you for today's video. If you do enjoy such content, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. It will really help me to create more of such content for you. So thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.